It's wonderful to be able to be back here with you all right now. I'm rejoicing very much on the inside for the opportunity to have to worship our Lord together with you and to feel so much better in doing it. So this is a good time right now. We're gathering together here this morning on Mother's Day, so I'd like to share with you something that somebody wrote under the heading, The Myths of Motherhood. It goes like this. Somebody said that a child is carried in its mother's womb for 9 months. Somebody does not know that a child is carried in its mother's heart forever. Somebody said it takes about 6 weeks to get back to normal after you've had a baby. Someone doesn't know that once you're a mother, normal is history. Somebody said you learn how to be a mother by instinct. Somebody never took a 3-year-old shopping. Somebody said being a mother is boring. Somebody never rode in a car driven by a teenager with a driver's permit. Somebody said good mothers never raise their voices. Somebody never came out the back door just in time to see her child hit a golf ball through the neighbor's kitchen window. Somebody said you don't need an education to be a mother. Somebody never helped a 4th grader with his math. Somebody said you can't love the 5th child as much as you love the 1st. Somebody doesn't have 5 children. Somebody said a mother can find all the answers to her child-rearing questions in the books. Somebody never had a child stuff beans up her nose. Somebody said the hardest part of being a mother is labor and delivery. Somebody never watched her baby get on the bus for the first time for the first day of kindergarten. Somebody said a mother can stop worrying after her child gets married. Somebody doesn't know that marriage adds a new son or daughter-in-law to a mother's heartstrings. Somebody said a mother's job is done when the last child leaves home. Somebody never had grandchildren. Somebody said your mother knows you love her, so you don't need to tell her. Somebody isn't a mother. So we come together on this day of our yearly celebration for those who have served with love as mothers. Funny thing, though, is that this year, that recognition of mothers is no longer in fashion. I don't know if you know this or not, but we are now being told by those who are woke that the very term mother is exclusionary, and they tell us that we're no longer to refer to women as mothers. They are to be labeled as birthing persons. Happy Birthing Persons Day. I'm not kidding you. The present administration has submitted their annual budget using that sterile term for mothers, birthing person, instead of saying mothers. Harvard University has instructed that a woman no longer be referred to as mothers, but again as birthing persons. And in yet another attack on the nuclear family, motherhood is another of those things that we are told is intolerable. But I would say to you this morning that there are a few things more honorable than a godly mother. A mother is not just someone who gives birth. It's someone who's devoted to her children. A real mother is not just participating in biological reproduction, but it's one who values her children as gifts from God. This morning, as we continue in our series of messages from 2 Samuel, we come to our text, which would remind us of the blessing of children. Our text this morning is 2 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, where we find these words. Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, and David grew steadily stronger, but the house of Saul grew weaker continually. Sons were born to David at Hebron. His first was Amnon by Hanoam the Jezreelitess. His second, Chileab, by Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmi, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. And the fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Eritham, by David's wife, Eglah. These were born to David at Hebron. In our text this morning, we find David was blessed with children. We're told that the war continued between the descendants of Saul and David as king of Judah. Our text calls it a long war, so we understand that this was something which was protracted. This was something which was not over quickly, that they continued to battle one another, and it continued to be a conflict between them that went on for a long time. And it seemed like for a while that neither one was going to be able to establish itself over the other. The fight just went on and on between David and the descendants of Saul. By human efforts, the struggle seemed deadlocked. But humans are not in charge. And their solutions seldom solve anything. We would do well to understand that our future is in God's hands. We make our plans. We work towards our goals. But it is only according to what God does that our future lies. Man didn't have a way to establish one side over the other, but God did. And the remarkable thing that we are told in this passage is that it came down to children. God blessed David with children. We have this list of 6 sons born in rapid succession to David there while he was at Hebron. But Saul's line, God had cut off. It was just as he had said he would do. When God was condemning Saul and his work, God told him not only would Saul no longer occupy the throne, but that his descendants would be cut off as well. His line would not continue. That God would see that his offspring no longer were able to rule in his place. That was a terrible thing in ancient times, to be told that your line would not be able to be continued. That's one thing a man strived for in ancient times, was to establish a legacy, to leave behind something of themselves. They wanted to be able to continue in some way, even after their life was over. But God told Saul, no, because of what you've done, I'm rejecting you, and I'm rejecting your line. Your people are going to be cut off, and they will not continue on the throne after you. And that's what we find in this passage. We don't see a list of Saul's descendants increasing, but we see David's. Because the opposite was true for David. God promised to establish him on the throne. God told him of his descendants that would continue on that throne. Even the eternal king, even the promised Messiah, even the one that was come to establish an eternal kingdom was going to be of his lineage that was established on that throne. It was by the gift of children that David was blessed with a future. God was advancing his purpose with that gift of children. The difference between Saul's line continuing or David's was that God blessed David with children. And so we're told in God's word that children are a blessing from God. and a strength to those who have been blessed by God with them. In Psalm 127, verses 3 through the beginning of verse 5, we find these words, "Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them." God has made the man strong, that he is blessed with children. Like arrows in his quiver, God has blessed him with strength that continues from him. When Jacob had finally reconciled with his brother Esau after their horrible falling out, Esau saw the great number of people that were with Jacob. I'd like for you to see Esau's question of Jacob and Jacob's response here in Genesis chapter 33, verse 5. He raised his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, "Who are these with you?" And so he said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." See what Jacob said there? This strength that I have, these many standing with me, are a blessing from God. God has gifted me with children. God has blessed me with offspring. He recognized God's hand in the blessing of his life that came from having children. And we remind ourselves this morning that children are a blessing that only God can impart. God is our maker. God is the one who is the source of all life. No one can create life except for God. And so when children are born, that is a gift of God to us. And thus children must be seen as a blessing from him. You know, when we think about David being blessed by children, having his line established by God through children, I want to note this about that. David was not always a good father. David was flawed in a lot of ways. You know, one of the things about Bible heroes that I find very impressive is that the Bible doesn't paint these unrealistic people for us. It shows us the great men and women of God were, in fact, very flawed like we are. And David had his flaws when it came to being a father, and it caused some terrible things to happen within his own family because he was flawed in that way. So the blessing of God was muted in some ways by his failure to treat God's gifts as he should have. But still, these were from God. These were God's blessing upon him. And by that gift, God established David's throne. And that brings me to the only other thing I want to share with you this morning on this Mother's Day, and that is this. We are blessed with children. I want you to think about that for a moment. As individuals, as a church, as a society, we are blessed with children. There's a strong inclination in our culture today to see children as a burden rather than a blessing. To see children as something that we don't want to have to deal with. Children are loud and messy and prone to unreasonableness. And a lot of people just don't want to put up with it anymore. Virgin Cruise Lines advertise that on their cruises, children are not permitted. No kids, no kidding, is their tagline. Who wants a lot of children running around when you're seeking to make the cruise about eating and gambling and drinking? When you're promoting adult interaction, there's no room for family fun. And so let's keep this interaction the way we want it between adults, and let's cut off the kids as an unnecessary burden. In a society that is intrusion that we don't want to put up with. Airlines have been looking for ways to ban children on some of their flights. Because who wants to be on a flight with a kid behind them crying or kicking the back of their seat or in some other way acting out? Those who are focused on themselves don't want the maturity and patience necessary to deal with children. They don't want the daughter to be more mature. They'd rather just have less kids around them. And with each person seeking their own way and avoiding responsibility, our country is in trouble. The more our society is focused about us and our needs and our wants and our pleasure, the less character we have in our society and the less depth there is to our nation. So this abandonment of God's gift to children is not a minor thing. It changes who we are as a people. It changes who we are as individuals. It changes who we are as a church. It changes who we are as a society. If we don't deal with children as a blessing from God. And I think the worst instance of that is in the practice of abortion. Oh, we talk about, not wanting to have people who have children by rape or incest, and we're just looking out for those poor people that shouldn't have to bear a child under those circumstances. That comes down to a tiny, tiny fraction. Almost nothing in comparison with the number of abortions. What is the main reason for abortion? Children are inconvenient. I don't want them now, if ever. This is not the right time. It's going to mess with my life. I'm not going to be able to get the satisfaction. I'm not going to be able to accomplish my dreams if I have to stop for a child right now. And so the child can be sacrificed for my own life's sake. Abortion is about not being burdened with children. The very children God is blessing us with. The very children that only God can give to us are seen as something unwanted, undesired, something which is a chain around our lives. Jesus had a very different attitude towards children than that. When his disciples wanted to protect Jesus from the frivolity of children intruding on his important ministry, Jesus rebuked them. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 14, but Jesus said, "Let the little children alone and do not hinder them from coming to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." To see children as a gift from God means that we need to receive what God has given us. To reject the gift is to reject the giver. To say, "I have no regard, Lord, for what you have given to me," says, "I have no regard, Lord, for your love towards me." Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. At that time the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a child to himself and set it before them and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." Do you see what verse 5 there said? In Jesus' own words, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." That's Jesus saying it right there. When we receive God's gift, we receive him. You can't have a full relationship with God if you have no regard for the way that God's blessing your lives. And if you see children as a burden that he's trying to put on you, an unwanted and unnecessary burden, that's to reject the one and only person
nature as a blessing.